Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the home front mobilization for the Second World War in the United States, let's talk a little bit about what was inspiring American involvement in the war. I've mentioned briefly before about the four freedoms, and freedom becomes the kind of ideological focus for America's war effort. While World War I had divided American society, World War II became known as the Good War because it was a time of national unity in pursuit of indisputably noble goals. However, all wars require the mobilization of patriotic public opinion, and freedom became the buzzword that helped to sell this war to the American public. Now, the four freedoms have some far-reaching implications, some of which we don't necessarily expect, and some of which we've already touched on as far as that goes. But what are the four freedoms? So the four freedoms, as you can see illustrated here by Norman Rockwell, are the freedoms of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. These are four freedoms that were outlined by FDR in a speech that he gave. Now, the freedoms of speech and religion are easier to pin down. In 1941, we were celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Bill of Rights. But the freedom from want and fear were a little bit more abstract in nature than the freedom of speech and religion. And freedom from want was by far the most ambiguous and the most controversial. Freedom from want originally was meant by FDR in regards to the elimination of trade barriers, but it quickly became linked to an economic goal that was far more relevant to the average citizen: protecting the future standard of living of the American worker and farmer by guaranteeing that the Depression would not resume after the war had ended, and bringing real freedom for the common man in the form of economic security. The Office of War Information was created to help mobilize public sentiment in favor of the war, and the freedom from want, in their conception, started to follow this New Deal conception of freedom, which focuses on, as I said, economic security. Under the watchful eye of the War Advertising Council, private companies joined in with the campaign to promote wartime patriotism, but also sought to position themselves for the post-war world, along with messages urging the buying of war bonds and growing victory gardens and those sorts of things. The war also witnessed a growth of messages defining a fifth freedom, a commonly overlooked freedom. Free enterprise was embraced as the fifth freedom, and it was often used as a way to criticize the idea of a guided economy and that connection to the notion of economic security, but without openly criticizing Roosevelt himself. Free enterprise also became rather connected to the idea of material consumption and freedom of choice among abundant possibilities. But this could only be possible if private enterprise is liberated from government control at the conclusion of the war. And so this will set us up quite nicely for the dominance of the idea of free enterprise, and also setting us up for that ideological battle of capitalism and free enterprise versus communism and a controlled, guided economy, what it boils down to in American psyche during the Cold War, which follows.